Hello, it's JFO, and I'm still wearing my robe. I might just wear it all the time. How are you today? Welcome to Monday. So today on the High Vibes with JFO show, we are going to talk about vibration and energy and spirituality in the universe. And the topic is dimensions versus density. So in the spiritual world right now, a lot of psychics, channelers, light workers, shamans, star seeds, whatever you want to call it, are talking about ascension. They're talking about Mother Gaia, the earth, and they're talking about how we are ascending from a 3D matrix to a 5D new earth experience, okay? Now, all of this sounds crazy and wacky and strange, and being a spiritual teacher myself, I specifically specialize in astrology, right? And specifically specialize in personality and your vibration meeting your personality, right? And I also teach through my 1, 2, 3, 4 method, which I learned through astrology. I teach spiritual teaching. So I use astrology kind of as a spiritual paradigm to understand the universe, understand the meaning of life. But I'm also a constant student and a constant researcher of information. That's my zone of genius in my birth chart. My comfort zone's Aquarius. So I am all about the information all the way. So last year, around June, July, is when I started to have an awakening experience to new spiritual information that I had never stumbled upon. And one part of that experience was actually the subject of interdimensional beings, or as we call them, aliens. But I just never went down that rabbit hole. It was just never a rabbit hole I ever went down. I never cared about aliens. I never thought about aliens. I most likely just considered it to be, fantasy, from some fantasy novel, not real. And I never factored it into my teachings. And the reason is because my teachings are all about non-physical versus physical, right? We're in this physical time, space, earth experience, okay? And we come from this non-physical oneness, higher power, God, whatever you want to call it, right? And that source energy that we come from is still a part of us. And so what I would always teach is a lot of the Abraham Hicks teachings. And, I channel stuff myself, but I use a lot of other spiritual tools in my tool belt to kind of explain things. And what I love is how Abraham Hicks explains it. So let me just say this piece, and then we'll go into the difference between density and dimension from what I know so far, because I'm still on my journey too, guys, okay? So Abraham Hicks talks about when you are off alignment, when you're feeling negative emotion is a GPS signal saying, you're not going the right way, right? Now, the negative of Abraham's teachings that I actually don't like is that, and I don't think the purpose of the teachings is this. I think it's just become this, is this idea that we should never feel negative emotion. No. Life is 50-50, as my coach Brooke says. Life is 50-50. You're going to feel negative emotion and you're going to feel positive emotion. Or from an Abraham Hicks perspective, you're going to have contrast versus desire. And it's that surfing of both, right? Because if we're in this two-ness experience, you can't understand hot without cold, right? Think about that. If you've been just so hot, it's like, Texas heat in the summer, you're just like, bring me like a winter's day. But then if you're living in New York City through the winter, all you freaking want is the Texas heat, right? So it's all about that comparison. That is the experience of the duality world that we live in, the world of separation. We were separated from that oneness to experience two-ness. That's how I always like to teach it. That's my own teachings of it, right? But what I love how Abraham talks about is that when you have that negative emotion and it's a little bit of a signal that you're off alignment, what it really is it's God, source, oneness, let's just say source. Source is always thinking pure, because source is pure, positive, love, light, energy, right? And we know this to be true because when we see a movie, we don't want the enemy to win. We don't want the darkness to win. We want the light to win, right? I mean, at least most people, unless you're a serial killer, I don't know. But we all want the light to win. That's what we secretly desire. We all want the light to win. We want good things to happen. We want to feel good, right? We don't want pain. We don't want contrast. We want love and oneness and joy and pleasure. So because we desire that, we know that that's the true the true source that we come from, okay? So the true source that we come from, God, whatever you want to call it, is always seeing you and your situation from this amazing high vibe place. And when you're not thinking that thought, it's not aligned, right? When you're thinking, no, my life sucks, this situation sucks, you're off alignment. And that's what negative emotion is. And the way that Abraham says it is that it's you versus you. So the non-physical you is not connected to the physical you, okay? So from that perspective, everything I've ever taught, my whole like spiritual journey, I mean, I got into spirituality when I was 15 and I'm 40 now. So that's how long I've been a student of it, basically a teacher of it, right? Okay. So last year, summer of 2020, all of a sudden, God wanted aliens to come into my life. Interdimensional beings, okay? And what I learned, this is the biggest thing I learned about it, is that I was thinking about physical versus non-physical, but I wasn't considering the dimensional levels of the physical, right? So when you're talking about the physical universe, I mean, it's limitless, right? But when you're talking about the physical universe or what we're doing here on Earth, this Earth experience, and you really start to like go into that place of like, whoa, man, what is life, right? Like when you go into that hippie place of like, what is the meaning of life, man? You really start to think about, what is it? Like Earth is here, but what else is happening in all these other dimensions? Are there other dimensions? Are there other portals, right? And another way to think of it is the show Once Upon a Time, where all of the fairy tales came into one show. I highly advise you binge that if you need a show to binge, because it's so good. But they're constantly going to different portals and different dimensions, and there's magic, and there's light magic, and there's dark magic. And so basically, a huge part of the awakening experience is realizing that that is not so far from reality, right? So in this video, I want to really ground ourselves in the difference between dimensions and density and what's happening right now in our world, okay? Now, I am still learning this. And someone I love to binge and just like geek out, and I take notes when I listen to her, is Lori Ladd, because she is so good at explaining this. Oh, she's amazing. So, okay, here we go. So the way you want to think of it is you want to think of density as a consciousness, and you want to think of dimensions as a perception. This is the best way to think of it, because they kind of entangle with each other. And the reason why they kind of entangle with each other is because once you get to a certain dimension, you don't really have density anymore in the way we think of it from our perspective here, okay? But density is really a 3D, so 3D, the third dimension, right? Density is really only truly existing in the lower dimensions, 3D, right? 1 to 3, okay? Now, let me give you an example or an analogy that will help you understand this. So when you think of science class, and I always used to teach this too, before I even went into this dimensional, crazy rabbit hole world that I'm now in with my learnings, okay? But think of science class. Solid, liquid, gas, and think of like the visuals you would have to draw out to understand it, right? So there would be like, you know, like a square, okay? And you'd have all these little molecules or these circles, right? And it's like they're all fitting into the square. That's solid, right? Matter, okay? But as you get into a liquid, there's a little bit more space. There's a little bit more space in there, right? And then as you get into solid, liquid, gas, it's moving faster and there's more space. And from where we can perceive it, right? Solid is solid, right? Liquid is more fluid, and gas we can't see. So this is a great way to understand dimension and density, okay? Specifically when you're talking about density, right? Because when you're talking about density, it's this lower vibration that's kind of lowering you down. But let's really talk about density from a perspective of what's happening right now. So what's happening right now as we ascend, as Mother Gaia ascends from 3D, third dimension reality, to 5D. And I'm going to talk about the dimensions in a second. Let's just focus on density right now. We are cleansing and clearing consciousness, dense consciousness. That's what's happening. So when people freak out and they say, oh my God, I'm going to go to this like planet called 5D, and is my loved one going to come with me? Guys, we're doing it here. We're not going anywhere, okay? It's a consciousness, right? So what we're clearing is the consciousness of self-serving, of greed, of fear, of separation, right? That's what we're clearing, okay? And we're upgrading. It's an upgrading, right? We've done the 3D. We don't need it anymore. Now, if you go to Lori Ladd's channel and you geek out, and feel free in the comments below if you have any questions, and I'll guide you as best I can. But if you go to her channel and you watch all of her, like she has a 12th dimensional grid one, she has so many great ones. But what I got from like what I know, because what I do is I listen and then I meditate on my own. I take that information and then I meditate it with my own knowing, with my own understanding and awareness of what I've channeled, right? And so what I got from that was that there was a time way back in our galactic history, because we don't really know our true galactic history. And that's a really fun rabbit hole to go down. When we go back in time, we actually fell. We're in the fallen world. That phrase that you hear from like a Christian perspective of like, you were born in a fallen world. It's true. It's actually true. And because it's coming from more of a galactic perspective, that we actually were in higher dimensions, and over thousands and thousands and thousands of years, we started to get more self-serving, more separated, more self-serving. Now, then you can go down other rabbit holes to figure out, well, who did that? Who was self-serving? Who started that, right? Like, what was the domino effect? And that's a whole other rabbit hole of a whole other video. But you start to realize that we actually were not meant to be 3D, but we have free will in this experience, right? And so now we are actually reversing the damage is really what's going on. We're ascending back to what we were meant to be. This heaven on earth experience where there's not separation, where there's not the consciousnesses of greed and self-serving and hate and abuse. And I mean, there's some really, really dark consciousness that exists in this world. I'm sure every day in your whole life, you think, God, someone murdered their family. You know, you hear these stories throughout your life and you're like, what? How can there be people out there that are this evil, right? It's a dense consciousness. And even if you're not evil, that consciousness is within you as well, right? Like we have to clear out our own vibration that's a part of that experience, okay? So when you're dealing with density, it's more from a vibrational standpoint, a consciousness standpoint, okay? But it's very much connected to the dimensions, because there's certain dimensions where you're not gonna have that density, right? So a dimension is a whole nother thing, because it's a perception, right? So when you start to ascend from 3D to 4D to 5D, what's happening is you are expanding your perception and understanding of the world. This is where it gets really cool, okay? And that's why it's called the Great Awakening, because you're awakening to a whole nother expanded view of the perception of your reality, right? It's basically you totally shifting your reality. Your reality completely changes. And that's why it's like such a profound moment where you'll never forget that time in your life when you have this sort of awakening to the truth, to this bigger viewpoint perception. Now, again, I'm still learning all of this. We're all in this together, guys, okay? But understand that, yes, there's going to be a weird confusion and mixture of these two themes, because first of all, words are so limiting, right? Like words are extremely limiting when we're trying to understand these like esoteric, like woo things, right? But just understand that like the way that I have read about it is that like if you're in 5D, you most likely are not in this dense consciousness, because if you're in a dense consciousness, you're most likely cut off from that higher expanded perception, okay? But since there's that 4D bridge that we're bridging the experience, a lot of people, we're not going to just be like static in one space, right? And so it's definitely, I think, possible to have a little bit of a higher density when you're in a lower dimension, and vice versa, right? So again, this concept is like so far and expansive and you know, esoteric and crazy, right? but I wanted to do a video on it because I'm learning it and I'm going through the journey of trying to understand it. Because again, it's very like, whoa, man, what's the meaning of life, man? Like, it's very like, you could get yourself into like a place, you know, when you like look in the mirror and you look at yourself and you just stare and you're like, who am I? It's like one of those moments, right? So let me know what you think. Let me know what you've learned in this experience. I would love to talk about this. And I'm definitely going to do more videos on it. I'm going to study a lot of these really incredible spiritual teachers that are channeling a lot of this information so that we can understand our galactic history, because that is where the fun begins. So I advise you to be open-minded, get curious, look into these things, and learn for yourself. Don't take anything at face value. Get some information, pray on it, meditate on it, get more information, pray and meditate it, and really try to learn for yourself this amazing time in our world right now where we are truly shifting the vibration, shifting the perception to have a whole new experience where there's going to be more love and light on this earth plane. So I'll catch you tomorrow for our Diamond Vibes video. See you then.